Just 1, 2. Ooh, hot mic. All right, well, good evening, everyone. It is good to see you here at First Baptist Church. My name's Cody. I'm the pastor here, and we are just so thankful for each one of you being able to take this evening and come out for Creation Ministries International. That's who we're being served by tonight. It is an organization that is committed to upholding the truth of God's Word, the authority of God's Word from the very first verse in Genesis, where a lot of people just openly dismiss it or question it. It is important for us to be grounded in what God's Word says, because ultimately what is taught about creation shapes what we believe about sin and salvation and our need for Jesus. We're especially thankful to have Dr. Jonathan Sarfati with us. If y'all would welcome him. Woo-woo. Before I allow him to speak, I do want to tell you, and just take a moment and tell you about some ways that you can support this ministry. Creation Ministries International is a faith-supported ministry. That means that they rely on the generosity of Christians to support their ongoing work in defending the truth of God's Word. And if you would like to give financially to support that ministry, please do so by empowering yourself with resources at the table in the other room, as well as making donations to them. That is a great way to disciple your children and others. So please take time after the service to visit that table. Also, if you have small children and you want to keep them occupied, there's also creation-oriented coloring sheets over in there. And so if you would like to get those for those kids, make sure that you do that right now. Please welcome Dr. Jonathan Sarfati to the platform.
Trying to quickly on these things. So how's this? You hear me all right? Yeah. That's much better. Okay. So I come from a different country. You may not have worked it out, but I do. So here is where I come from. Yeah, okay. I also lived in this country, New Zealand, for a long time as well. So I've got a mixture of Australia and New Zealand there. I did come to this country in 2010. So I collect passports like you guys collect stamps probably. I've got 3 passports now. One reason we came because we have we've got 2 granddaughters who live in Florida, so much easier to visit. We're in the same country as opposed to 9,000 miles across the ocean. I'm also a retired chess master. A long time ago I played chess from memory like this. I'm doing this here. I'm playing 12 guys from memory here. This guy is telling me what they're doing, and he's making my moves for me. Because every square has a letter and a number, like an Excel spreadsheet, 8 by 8. That's how you do that. And I did play some good people in my time. Another thing, I'm also ethnically Jewish. My name is the Hebrew word for Frenchman. So I can tell Jewish jokes and French jokes and get away with it. But I do believe in Jesus, Yeshua, to give you his Hebrew name, and he fulfilled many prophecies in his first coming of the Old Testament, which is also called the Hebrew Bible or the Tanakh. So, and only he could have fulfilled them because some of those prophecies have an expiration date on them. So only he could have fulfilled it. The prophecies are expired now. Now, one place you can find some good information is our free website, creation.com. I know it's hard to memorize website, but ours is creation.com, has about 15,000 articles on it, and it's updated every day with something new and topical. And now one way to be connected to our website is our free email newsletter. It's called the Info Bites. We don't spam you or give your address to any third party. I'm not going to sell your address to anyone. We'll keep your privacy. So Malachi, would you mind passing these clipboards around, please? Now all you need to do is put your name and your email. It's an email newsletter. But also if you put your postcode down, you'll see any creation speakers in your area. Because one of my colleagues in a month's time is speaking about an hour away from here if you're interested in hearing from a different perspective than mine. He's an ex-Army Air Force pilot, so he has a few different things than what I do. Now, as far as the books are concerned, we're a faith-funded ministry. We don't earn our money by book sale. We're a donation-funded ministry. The books and our outreach, we are here to equip the church and the home with how you can defend your faith from the first verse. And that's why we have books like my Genesis commentary called the Genesis Account. 800 pages. It's the only commentary in the world that talks about dinosaurs. Other commentaries don't want to talk about them. But they existed, they should be talked about because people have questions, therefore we need to have answers to them. There's one book which is interesting, but also we have a companion DVD set called the Genesis Academy. And one thing that motivates us is the command by the Apostle Peter to be ready to make a defense to anyone who asks you for the reason for the hope that's in you. We're supposed to be prepared, we're supposed to have answers. We're supposed to have reasons for what you believe. The Christian faith is not a blind faith. In fact, Jesus told us to love the Lord your God with your heart, soul, strength, and your mind. There's nothing in the Bible that says you check your brains in at the church door. No, we're supposed to engage our minds. Well, let's face it, what happens when you have questions from your kids? They go to the public school, the government schools, or latest movie, and they ask things like, is there life on other planets? And doesn't carbon-14 prove the Earth is millions of years old? And how could dinosaurs exist if the world was millions of years old, if the Bible is true? Well, one place to find is our Creation Answers book, which has 60 questions and 20 chapters. And if you really want something, this is a real Jewish bargain. It's a starter pack, which has a free DVD. It has my first book called Refuting Evolution, designed for the high school student, and the Creation Answer book, but this free DVD as well. So that's a real bargain for you. Now, when I talk about anything, it's good to define your terms. Now, that's how the cults get you. They use the same words that we use, but they have different meanings for the term. So when you have this cult, the Jehovah's Witnesses or Mormon at your door, you should make sure you define what they mean by the words they use. Now, I think the same true with dinosaurs. What do I mean by the word dinosaur? Well, dinosaur has a very distinctive meaning. It has these legs that are vertical. They're column-like legs, so the dinosaurs were actually held up upright. They're upright legs. See, crocodiles and lizards, their legs sprawl out to the sides. So it's not correct to call a crocodile or a Komodo dragon a dinosaur. The leg structure is totally different. And also, if you look here, here's the thigh bone here. This part here is called the process. That's an anatomical term. A process, it puts into a hole in the hip bone. That's also a distinctive feature of dinosaurs. When you look at a dinosaur hip, they have a hole there. Now, we have a cup there. Now, I'm not saying you have to memorize this too. It's called acetabulum. It's Latin for little vinegar cup because we have a cup there in our hips. Most animals have a cup there. Dinosaurs are unique in that they have a hole there. So if the creature doesn't have a big hole there, it's not a dinosaur. So remember, it's the column-like legs and the big hole in the hip. That's what makes a dinosaur a dinosaur. Now, where do you find out about these unique creatures? It's in the history book of the universe. This is a book from creation and goes right to the end of time until and up to eternity future. That's how far it goes. And it does tell us when dinosaurs existed, when they were made, who made them. Because you go back right to the first book of the Bible, we see on day 6, God made the beasts of the earth according to their kinds. Now it's interesting, 10 times Genesis says they reproduce according to their kinds. Not one kind evolving into different kinds. There's no room for evolution there, but there's a lot of room for variation within these kinds. God created the kinds with immense ability to vary, but not one kind going into another kind. Like birds are a different kind from dinosaurs because birds were created on day 5. Dinosaurs were created on day 6. But also on day 6, God made humans. Now we see that they were made male and female, Genesis 1. See, when you look at the structure of Genesis, it's a technique called recapitulation. What the ancient Near East would do, they'd have a summary outline of the whole, and then they'd focus in on the most important part of that and go into more detail. See, Genesis 1 gives you the whole creation in 6 days, really goes up to Genesis 2:4. That's where the chapter should be divided. And then chapter 2:4 onwards tells you more about the end point of Genesis 1, which is the creation of man and woman, which gives you more details. It says that God created Adam first out of the dust. And then Genesis 1 says, I've given man dominion over the rest of the animals. In the Bible, naming something is an exercise of dominion. So God gets Adam to name all the animals. So he's getting Adam to exercise his dominion by his naming. And then God creates Eve from his rib. So far more detail in Genesis 2. But what you can tell from Genesis 1 alone is that humans and dinosaurs lived at the same time. Now, you won't find that taught in the government schools or any of the natural history museums, but this is what God's word says, and he was there at the time. He says they lived at the same time. Now, you might get a question coming back which says, if they lived at the same time, why don't we find the fossils together? Now, when someone asks a question, you should try to get to behind that question. What is the assumption behind that question? The assumption is, if things live together, then you'll find them fossilized together. But is this a good assumption? Well, have a look at this. In the foreground's a fish called the coelacanth. They thought that died out with the dinosaurs, supposedly 66 million years ago. But we know perfectly well that coelacanths are alive today. In the background, that's the whale flipper. Now, whale fossils and coelacanth fossils are never found together, but we know they live together. They live together in the sea right now, but they're never found fossilized together. So just because things live together, it does not guarantee they will be fossilized together. The other assumption behind that question is that the fossil record is a record of age. It's nothing of the sort. It's a record of burial. It's a record of burial mainly by the globe-covering flood of Noah's day. So that's what we're seeing in the fossil record, the order in which the flood buried things. And since the flood began with the fountains of the great deep bursting forth, something in the ocean, before the rainfall, something happened in the ocean, don't forget. So you would expect to find things on the ocean floor being buried first, which is what we do find. And because it's in the water, I expect to find fish buried next. And then, as the flood crept up on the land, I'd expect to find things on the border of water and land buried. That's the amphibians. And it seems that when you look at the pre-flood world, dinosaurs were living in closer to the sea than humans were. Because often we find dinosaur fossils with a lot of marine things. Now, this is another problem because dinosaurs living on land, marine things living in the sea, why would they have been found fossilized together? That sounds very strange. Unless you have a flood washing them together into a huge basin. That's the only way you get sea creatures and land creatures buried in the same places, that they were washed together by an enormous amount of water. Now, among things in the fossil record, of course, we have dinosaurs. Dinosaurs definitely existed. There's no question about that. Some were huge, as you can see here. This is probably something like a brachiosaurus. And most of the dinosaurs have Greek or Latin names. This is a Greek name meaning armed lizard because its front legs were so long. That's unusual for the dinosaurs to have a front leg so long. And this head's about the size, higher than a 4-story building. So pretty big. To give you an idea of scale of some of the big things, well, here's a human here, quite tiny compared to some of these big dinosaurs. And this is not a dinosaur, it's a flying reptile, it's not a dinosaur. It doesn't have the leg structure or the open hip bone. But the biggest creature of all, the biggest land creature, the animal of all, I should say, is the blue whale. And they're alive today. Bigger than any known dinosaur. But some dinosaurs were quite tiny, like this Compsognathus, the size of a rooster. Now, there's an interesting thing because if you understand a bit of physics, you know you just can't scale up things. I know you've probably seen things like Gulliver's Travels or Land of the Giants, or where you got these people scale ridiculous. It doesn't work that way. It cannot work that way. The science doesn't allow this. Because tall creatures have extra problems. One of them is getting your blood from your heart to your brain. I mean, we need a heart to have a blood pressure around 120/80, so the blood gets from here to here. But a giraffe, look how tall that is. You need much more blood pressure to get the blood up to the brain, like about 300/180. That's big, which means it needs a very powerful heart. It also needs, his legs have pressure bandages on it to make sure the blood goes from the leg up to the heart again. Here's a problem for you though. What happens when the giraffe drinks? Why doesn't it blow its brains out with a hemorrhagic stroke? With a blood pressure of 300, I mean, if you get a blood pressure of 180, go to hospital. It's dangerous. But this thing has 300. And that was a problem. Scientists couldn't work out how this giraffe did that because of why it didn't blow its brains out. They found it has some veins in the neck which actually pool the blood. So when the giraffe bends down, the blood pools in the veins, doesn't go back to the heart. The heart hasn't got anything to push on, so the blood pressure automatically drops. It's an automatic blood pressure regulating system, which we don't need, but this thing needs. And when the giraffe raises neck, the blood goes back to the heart directly and it's pumped immediately up to the brain. You know what it's like? Sometimes you're lying down, you get up too quickly, you feel lightheaded, because the blood hasn't got to your brain yet, that's why. The giraffe doesn't have that problem. Now think of this Brachiosaurus. Look how big this thing was. It would have had a blood pressure of about 750. And one of the things it had, it's a hugely powerful heart, probably had pressure bandages on its legs, probably had some sort of system like that so it didn't blow its brains out. I can't tell you what it was because we only have its bones. This is all we have. I can't tell you how it did that. We know God must have had some amazing design for this huge creature to be alive, to cope with this enormous blood pressure difference. I just don't know what it was. I just know there must have been something there. Maybe we'll find some soft tissues that might give us a clue, but that gives you an idea. You just can't scale things up without extra design features. Okay, so anyone want to have a guess of what the biggest dinosaur was then? Anyone? Go ahead. Please. I don't mind, you can have a guess. I'm not going to be... Sorry? Well, one of those long-necked creatures, yes. That'll be one of them, yeah. One of them, yeah. Definitely a long-necked creature, definitely, yeah. Okay, well, here is a chart of things. And you notice this thing called Amphicelius is off the scale, supposedly. That's what they say. So they say it was 122 tons and 60 meters long or 200 feet long. That's what they say. But then you have to ask, what was it based on? Often when you hear about fossil bones in the media, you should ask, what is the evidence that they rarely have? So what's the evidence they have for this creature? Well, here's a picture of a lot of them, okay? The black part here is the reconstruction, what they think the creature looked like. The white part is what they actually found. They found one broken bone, and that bone has disappeared now. We can't even go back and test it. And from that one bone, they reconstructed that whole creature, which I think is a little bit... I don't believe that somehow. One bone, you can't possibly know what else they had. Now, when you have things like Diplodocus here, and here's a human for scale, they've got most of the bones of that creature. So yeah, this creature was big. We've got the bones to prove it. But some of these other very big dinosaurs, we've got very few remains of them. So we've got a lot of guesses, like Argentinosaurus is quite famous for being big, but we really haven't got that many of its bones. I think my best for the biggest dinosaur might be this thing called Pagatotitan, found in Argentina. Well, here's some humans for scale. And it looks like we've got most of the bones, but there's a reason for the technicolor here. It's because we've got bones from 4 different specimens. So maybe, okay, maybe you're right, maybe you're not. Okay, but I think this is probably a very big creature, but just to let you know, it's bones from different specimens recombined into one. And we've also got this creature called dead red mortars, where we have most of the lower skeleton, not much of the neck. But most of the stuff down here, that's pretty well, it's pretty good. And again, here's a human for you. And it's interesting that the discoverers said this had a weaponized tail 30 feet long. So remember that weaponized tail, because you can tell from the bones here, these bones supported muscles. And when you consider, look at how big this thing is. You think about something this thick, full of bone and muscle, that's incredibly powerful. A real weapon, that thing. Now the question is, are dinosaurs in the Bible? I think they are, but not by name. The concept's in the Bible. There's a theological parallel to this, because the cult people come knocking at the door and they tell you the word Trinity is not in the Bible. How do you answer that? Well, so what is the right answer? Because a doctrine is in the Bible, because the Bible says that Father's God, the Son is God, the Holy Spirit is God, and there's one God. The doctrine, the Trinity is in the Bible. The word is not, but the doctrine is. If they come back and say, well, you should stick to words that are found in the Bible, then you point out the word Bible is not found in the Bible. But I think that the dinosaur, the creature that we now call a dinosaur, is in the Bible. The thing is, it's not named because the name is a very recent name. 1841 is when the word was invented. So of course it's not going to be in the King James Bible, or the Geneva Bible, the Wycliffe Bible, because the word didn't exist to put it in. But there are creatures that are in the Bible that are now what we would call dinosaurs. Now the name, it was from Richard Owen, again from the Greek words meaning terrible lizard or terrible reptile, for a specific, those creatures with the hole in the hip and the vertical legs. So he grouped them by this name, dinosaur. So it's a modern word. When you think of a word like calculator, some of you guys are old enough to remember slide rules, aren't you? Okay. But the word calculator is a modern device. But the word calculator is a very old word. You've got a group of Oxford University, brilliant mathematicians at Oxford University in the Middle Ages called the Oxford calculators. So the word calculator is much older than the word dinosaur. Yeah. But here's what is in the Bible. If you go to the earliest book of the Bible to be finished, I think was the book of Job. You see, Genesis wasn't finished until Joseph died. It goes back to creation, but it wasn't ended until Joseph died. But I think Job was written around the time of Abraham or Isaac. So it's older. It was finished earlier. And in the book of Job, we have God giving him a creation lesson. And all these creatures are well known. We know what these creatures are. But then we get to this creature called behemoth. What's a behemoth? I think so, but the thing is the translators didn't know what it was, so they left the Hebrew alone. Behemoth is not an English word, it's a Hebrew word. They didn't translate it because they didn't know what it meant. Now, behemoth is a Hebrew plural too. It means beasts, plural. Behemah means one beast, behemoth means more than one beast. So why are you calling one creature by a plural word? It's because it's saying this is the beast of beasts. So it's the biggest creature God had made. That's why it's got the plural there to intensify it. But he's a plant eater. He eats grass like an ox. But also he says he makes his tail stiff like a cedar. Now what's a cedar? It's a very big tree. That's why King Solomon made his temple out of the Lebanon cedar trees, right? Because it's the biggest tree that he could find. And in the Bible, when something is compared to a cedar, it's saying how amazingly magnificent it is. Now, some study Bibles claim that behemoth was an elephant. Okay, here's an elephant tail. Is that a cedar tree, I'm wondering? A bonsai cedar, maybe. Another idea is the hippopotamus. Well, okay, here's a hippo tail. Now, this doesn't make sense. Here's another idea. Now remember what I told you about this creature here, the 30-foot long weaponized tail. This thick maybe. That's a tail like a cedar. That makes perfect sense of the Bible's description of a tail like a cedar. An elephant or a hippo does not. The tail like a cedar has to be something like this, like a dreadnoughtus. Now what about Leviathan? Well, it's interesting that one description of Leviathan is that his skin seems to be immune to spears. And that fits a huge crocodile called Dinosaurs, about twice as wide, as long as the biggest crocs now, which I have to go back to Australia, back in my home city, Queensland. If you think of the Crocodile Hunter Museum, they are big, dangerous creatures. But this thing was twice as long and therefore about 10 times as heavier. And it was covered with bony armor. It had armor plating in its skin. So when you think about what the creature was like, it was a river creature that you just couldn't, that harpoons and spears were useless against, because it had the armor plates in the skin. So the Leviathan was not a dinosaur, because again, it's got the sprawling legs. It's not a dinosaur, but it's, I think, an extinct giant alligator-like thing called a Dinosaurs. It's probably closer to an alligator than to a crocodile. So that's what I think is the Leviathan, to answer your burning questions about that. So a lot of different things. I think there are also some legends. Humans talk about dragons in their history. That was a big thing for them, the dragons around. Like, for instance, the Chinese calendar is a 12-year cycle with these 12 animals going in a cycle, and the dragon is one of them, but the dragon seems to be just an ordinary animal. It doesn't seem to be anything magical about a dragon. When you look at the historical Chinese calendar, it's just another animal. And when you think of the word for dragon in Chinese is long, and in the word for dinosaur is konglong, which means terrible dragon. It's interesting that Chinese people see a connection between the dragons of their own culture and the modern dinosaurs. And when Chinese scientists name a dinosaur, like we will often call it something saurus, they call it something long to keep their cultures. Some Chinese dinosaurs named something long, that's how they do it. And you've got things like this as well, some statues which seem to match the best descriptions we have of dinosaurs. Okay, then what happened to them then? That's the question. Okay, I was saying that the Bible does talk about them. It talks about when they were created. It says that they were still alive around the time of Job. But something happened to most of them that caused them to become fossils. Now, what could have done that? Well, see, here's an example of a dino fossil. These are fossils of fighting dinosaurs. They were fossilized in the middle of a fight. This is what they were doing. The evolutionists say they were fighting like this. So what could have caused them to be buried so quickly they didn't have a chance to break off their fight? And buried so deeply they didn't decay or get scavenged. I mean, think about this. Have you ever seen fossil roadkill? It's not going to happen, is it? So how do you get a fossil? You've got to bury something really quickly and really deeply. That's the only way you do it. So scavengers can't get to it. And with the burial, you have the minerals to turn that thing into stone. So you need to have rapid burial with lots of mud and mineral-rich liquid to form a fossil. And these fossils are often in layers that go across whole continents and even match layers in different continents. And not just a local flood. Often the layers are so wide they go across the whole world. And the only thing that will produce something like that across the world is a cause that's across the world, which is the flood of Noah's day. Another thing is when you go to museums, you might find these dinosaur fossils with their heads arched back like this, which is ridiculous. I mean, things don't do this. It's very unnatural. But that puzzled the experts for decades. But then it took someone to experiment with freshly killed chickens and dunk them into cold water. And their heads swung right back. It turns out that things like this have to have elastic ligaments on the neck. Because think about this. This is not too hard to do, right? This is much harder to do. So think about a dinosaur with a heavy head trying to hold this out with his muscles. You get exhausted. So it looks like they had elastic ligament to do most of that, to take up most of the weight. So these dinosaurs had elastic ligaments like chickens do today. Elastic ligament down the spine. And the thing is, after death, muscles don't work, so the head goes down. But if you got buoyancy of water, the buoyancy takes up the mass of the head, and now the elastic ligament has enough force to pull the head back, like it did with those chickens that were freshly killed. So underwater, the heads came back. Now, when they chopped off severed the ligament, the head didn't come back anymore. So it looks like these dinosaurs, and you find these all over the world. It's called the typical dinosaur death pose. This is how common it is. It means these dinosaurs were underwater when they died. So the water supports the necks being pulled back, and then they're buried in that position and preserved in that weird position. That's where we find them. Another thing is footprints. I mean, if you left a footprint outside, how long is it going to last? Not very long, you think? I agree with you, okay, but this is not what they want to tell us, though, because you find footprints, like this goes back to Queensland, Australia. Now, to 3,000 plus dinosaur footprints were found, but they had to remove another rock layer to uncover them. And this rock layer was meant to be millions of years younger than the layer of the footprints. Okay, so a million years from the footprints to the next layer. That's what they told us.
How big do you think those footprints are?
Oh, pretty big. Maybe. They're big, okay. The point is, though, when the layer was removed, the footprints started to wear away almost immediately. They're in rock, but they wore away. So they built a shed over it. That wasn't good enough. So now they're inside this conservation building that controls running water, running children, running animals, controls the temperature and humidity to try to preserve these footprints in rock. Okay, but they told us that they must have been made when the stuff was soft to leave an impression, and then were exposed for millions of years before the next layer came and buried them. How can that be when they didn't last a week unprotected? How could they be exposed for millions of years? That means that there can't be very much time between the layers. So you have this clue. You've got this very fast form layer that goes across the whole world, but also one layer after another, really quickly, with no time between them. Otherwise, the footprints would have been worn away. And yet another thing we've found is not just with dinosaurs, but everything they looked at, they always find the footprints down here, but the animal up here, supposedly millions of years apart. But how could this thing have lived millions of years to die up here? Well, it couldn't have. So the answer is these footprints were laid down as they were trying to escape this rising water, and they were escaping to higher ground, and the flood eventually captured them on the higher ground after their footprints down here, which means there isn't much time between the footprints and the animal. Not the millions of years. So again, the millions of years disappears. And if you haven't got millions of years, there's no time for evolution to happen. I'm not saying that millions of years will allow evolution. I'm just saying that if you haven't got it, then evolution cannot work. So no time between when someone leaves a track and when someone is buried. But another thing that's been found with dinosaurs is blood cells. and even soft tissues and proteins, from animal proteins and animal DNA have been found with dinosaurs. And one of the discoveries, Dr. Mary Schweitzer has been doing this for about 30 years, and she was on 60 Minutes with Leslie Stahl talking about her discovery.
Mistake. Mary put some fragments of the bone in acid to dissolve away the outermost layer of mineral. But the acid worked too fast, and all the mineral dissolved away. Being a fossil, there should have been nothing left. But there was, and it was elastic, like living tissue.
This is the piece.
No. She showed us video she took under the microscope.
That's really what happened?
Yes.
That's the dinosaur bone?
Without mineral now. That's what was left.
It looked like the soft tissue she would have expected to find if it had been modern bone. This was impossible. This bone was 68 million years old.
So you see this and you think, what? You say,
I didn't want to tell anybody.
You'd be ridiculed,
Yes.
right?
And so I said to my technician, okay, do it again. I don't believe it.
And yet, in sample after sample, they were there. Things that looked suspiciously like flexible, transparent blood vessels. She finally mustered the courage to tell Jack.
She said she dissolved the bone away and there were blood vessels. And, you know, I was like shocked. I mean,
How could that be?
How could that be? That's right.
The things Mary was finding inside dinosaur bones,
Look at that.
blood vessels, and even what seemed to be intact cells, pose a radical challenge to the existing rules of science, that organic material can't possibly survive even 1 million years, let alone 68 million.
Okay, science tells you it can't be 1 million years old. Don't they always tell us trust the science? So let's do it. They can't be millions of years old. And even DNA they've found, which also can't be millions of years old, because DNA breaks down really, really quickly. Now, okay, since Job lived after the flood, so how could he see dinosaurs if the flood wiped them out? Well, the answer is the flood didn't wipe out all of them, because 2 of every kind went on board the ark. No, not this stupid thing. Please don't ever use this silly thing. I hate that picture. I think it should be banned. I'm not in favour of book banning normally. I'd make an exception for these bathtub arks, though. Because the bathtub arks tell the kids the ark's a fairy story. And kids are very visual. That's the impression of the ark they get, and they know the ark's a load of rubbish. And it would be if it was this ark. This ark is a load of rubbish. But the real ark is not. The real ark is very good science. So let's show kids the real ark. Because the Bible tells us how big the real ark was. 300 cubits long, 50 wide, and 30 wide. And this is what a cubit means, you know, elbow to fingertip, outstretched, okay. Cubit is Latin for elbow. You know, if you have a blood draw here, this is called the cubital fossa. Okay, some useless information for you. Okay, but a cubit, this is the standard unit of measure. I don't know how big the cubit was, but let's say mine's 19 inches. Let's say that the ark was made with 18-inch cubits. I'm being conservative here. Okay, so let's say it's an 18-inch cubit. It's shorter than mine, a little bit shorter than mine. So how big was the ark then? Well, yeah, so it's 1.5 football fields. And it's wide enough to block 6 lanes of the interstate. And it's higher than a 4-story building. That's big. So there's no reason why we can't tell kids, here is what the ark looked like, have some humans for scale. The only thing that's wrong with the picture is the ark would have been black. Because it's coated with pitch inside and out. And pitch was always used to be made, most of its history, what they did is pine resin, 2 parts of pine resin, 1 part of charcoal. So it's black. And that's a good design. It's called a composite material. Very good engineering design, because the charcoal particles stop cracks from propagating, from extending through the mineral. You know, why your tires are black, it's because they've got carbon black. It's very fine particles of carbon, because rubber's milky white. But your tires have carbon black, because again, those particles make the rubber much stronger and more abrasion resistant. So the pitching of the ark would have made it extremely impact resistant, as well as waterproof, but impact resistant as well. It would have made the wood much firmer. It would not have slid apart from each other. It just holds the wood in place. And you know, pine resin, the resin of a tree, the sap, is designed to be insect repellent. That's why the tree has it. It resists insects and resists fungus and resists other microbes. So it's antimicrobial, antifungal, insect repellent. So it means the ark would have been protected by this pitch inside and out by this very strong composite material inside and outside the ark. So it would have been black. I think inside you probably want to put up a white sheet so light will reflect off it, but it would have looked black on the outside. And also the carbon black absorbs ultraviolet, so it means that it protects the resin or protects the rubber from ultraviolet damage. So it's a good. So God knew what he was doing when he said pitch the ark inside and out. That was a very good reason for doing that. But also, when you calculate how big this thing was, in fact, if you want to go on our website, we've got a lot of free videos as the social media video program. We've got loads of free videos on our website now. And one year, Dawn, who's helped me at the book table, she's my colleague from CMI, she and I did a video together on the ark. So you can watch us in action if you want to on our website. It's free. Now, the ark is so big, it would take, you know, the biggest thing on the road today, the semi-trailer. What do you call those things? Semi-trailer, semi, you call it here, tractor trailer. You know, they block off all the lanes. They're not supposed to be in the left lane, but road rules for other people, not for them. You can't see the sign in front because they're in the way. Riding abreast, so you can't actually get more than 50 miles an hour. But the ark could hold about 340 trailer loads worth. You think of how big they are on the road, and then you see the ark is 340 times the capacity of one of these. And this is how many animals it could have held. And this is why I think a local flood idea doesn't make sense of the Hebrew text. It doesn't make sense. Why would you build a huge ark to escape a local flood? Just migrate somewhere like Lot did from Sodom, right? Just went somewhere else. If the flood was local, just go somewhere where the flood wasn't happening. But there was nowhere to go because the flood's global. And how does a local flood last a whole year? Floods don't last a whole year. They do if they cover the whole world, they will. Okay, so this is how big the ark was. Basically, 300. Every ark can hold 300 sheep weighing 125 pounds each. And you got 340 times that. So you got about 102,000 sheep-sized animals. And most animals are much smaller than a sheep. Think of most of the birds, most of the lizards. Sheep is quite a big animal, really. Most animals are much smaller. And the ark is also incredibly stable. Because it's so long, waves would tend to align it with the wave direction. So that's where you want it. You don't want the waves hitting the side. You want it to going along. But also, even if they hit the side, because the ark is so wide, it was almost impossible to capsize. Do you remember how wide the ark was? 50, it says length to breadth is 1 to 6, but it's a 1 to 10 length to height ratio. So it's very, very wide and very shallow. And that's what you want for it. It's not a boat that has to move anywhere. When you look at the way the Greek and the Hebrew describe it, it's clearly a rectangular box. That's why you only have 3 dimensions given. It's a rectangular box. And the words teba in Hebrew, kibotos in Greek mean a box or a chest-shaped thing, not a boat. There are different words I can use for boat, but it's not a boat. It's just designed to sail, to keep things safe, and it would have kept things incredibly safe. Because being 50 cubits wide, even 500-foot waves could not have capsized the ark. Some engineers did the computer simulations and scale modeling, and 500-foot waves could not have capsized the ark. And because it's so low profile, it also has very little area for a hurricane wind to catch. So a hurricane would not have capsized it either. So the biggest danger for a wooden sailing ship is the mast. The mast has leverage. So the wind hits the mast up here, of course, can capsize the ship, but it's so low profile, there's nothing for the wind to catch. So incredibly stable, but also very comfortable, because it would rock so slowly that you would not get seasick from it. You wouldn't have enough of the frequency would be too low for humans to get seasick from it. So the passenger would not have been sick throughout the voyage. So a lot of good things about the ark design. God knew what he was doing when he gave those dimensions and the pitching, all those things. And even the decks, the 3 decks are like a box girder, a giant box girder construction. So that even the decks would actually be a reinforcing structure from within. So a lot of different things about the ark. It's fascinating engineering, the design there. So what was on the ark then? Well, that was clearly on it, because Noah had to send them out, didn't he? This wasn't on the ark, by the way, because the only creatures are on the ark. Look at the description of the creature, but also what was destroyed off the ark. Everything off the ark was destroyed that breathed through nostrils. Insects don't breathe through nostrils. So insects weren't passengers. So only land creatures. So there are no jellyfish, because jellyfish are in the sea as well. So only land creatures have to be rescued from a flood. The sea creatures don't have to be, because they're in the sea. They're used to living in the sea. Land creatures aren't used to it, so they have to be rescued. So this creature was not on either, because it's in the sea. This creature was. So the answer to what was on the ark was land animals with backbones. So no congressman. But also, there are not as many animals as you might think. I mean, the kind is much bigger than a species. But even if it was one pair of every land vertebrate species, that gives you about 60,000 animals. Because most of the species, millions of species are insects and sea creatures, so they weren't on the ark. So 60,000 or so land vertebrate species. But the ark could contain almost twice that number of sheep. So species would not be a problem. I think it was a lot less than that, because these things are all the same kind, and we know that because they have babies together called hybrids. If they can have babies together, remember in Genesis 1 they reproduce after their kind. So if they have babies together, they are the same kind. A lion has a baby with a tiger, it's called a liger. If it's a male liger, it's called liger. If it's a male tiger, it's called a tigon. And they can have babies with leopards too. And the biggest cat in the world today is a liger. But also a liger can have babies too. A male lion can mate with a liger, and it's called a liger. So these are clearly the same kind. In fact, you can go to quite a few of these creatures, like the camel and llama hybrid, and beefalo. I think you guess what that is. Beef cattle, buffalo. Okay. Zonkey and Zorse, Geep. Guess what they are, I hope? Pig and boar, or paw, I don't know. Pizzly bear, polar bear and grizzly, right? Okay, same kind, okay? See, the kind is bigger than the species. This is not on the ark, but it's a whale and a dolphin. It's a false killer whale and a bottlenose dolphin, forming a wolphin. And the wolphin has had babies of her own. And that means that these must be all the same species, not the same kind, but same species. If they can have babies that have their own babies, that means they're the same species. So when you look at the number of animals, if they're species, it's 60,000. If there's a genus, which is the next highest level, then there's only about 16,000. If it's the next highest above that, called a family, which I think it was mostly. I think most of the time the kind is roughly the family, not always. And the fault is because of these man-made terms which aren't always consistent. The kind is God's term, which is consistent. The man-made terms, family and genus and species, are not always consistent. So I think about 2,000 animals were on the board of the ark. They could have held 102,000 animals. Now, even big dinosaurs would not have been a problem because, first of all, you've got too many of them named. Like, for instance, what was realized when they actually started to study the dinosaur bones, they could work out what was growing bone, looked very spongy, and what was mature bone, which looked quite solid. And so they could work out that these things were still growing, and as they got a bit older, they changed the shape. So these were all the same creature at different stages of life. So again, not 3 pairs, but 1 pair of these. In fact, one expert, in fact, this is the Horner, is the Jack who was on the video I showed you. He said about 1/3 of dinosaur species may never have existed, but are merely different stages of growth than the growth of other known dinosaurs. So it looks like got too many dinosaur names, but also we have this phenomenon where dinosaurs went through a growth spurt. And it seems that most of the dinosaurs analyzed, there's some exception, but I think most of the dinosaurs went through this growth spurt. So if God is the one who's telling the animals to come to him, God says the animals will come to you. God is doing something to bring the animals to Noah. Noah didn't have to fetch them. So he brings them on a year before the growth spurt starts. So they're on the ark. They're still quite small throughout their time on the ark, but as soon as they get off the ark, they're ready to go through their growth spurts really quickly and reach their full height and then level off again. So the answer, how do you fit the giant Brachiosaurus on the ark? Because they weren't giant when they went on, they were juveniles, far smaller than their adult height. And there are also things we could talk about, a lot of things I could talk about, just the ark. I've got a talk I'm doing for, I've got a seminary project coming up actually, and I'm doing a talk just on the ark about things like how do you dispose of the waste products and other things like freshwater and saltwater fish. There's sort of stuff we can see that the video that Dawn and I did, we cover a few of those things you want to go to a bit more. But what happened to dinosaurs then? I think humans hunted them is one thing. But let's face it, lots of creatures have become extinct and we don't hear much about them. It seems that, over 2/3 of all mammals that were on the ark have gone extinct. So we think of dinosaurs, but dinosaurs weren't the only thing that's become extinct. Maybe we have to explain why things are not extinct rather than why things are extinct. But the evolutionists have their own ideas, like for instance this junkie theory, which says that narcotic plants evolved, so the plant eaters got stoned, and the meat eaters then had nothing to hunt. Okay, that's one of the evolutionary theories. Here's another one, the asteroid theory. The problem is, why didn't the asteroid wipe out the crocodiles? Well, they told us dinosaurs ruled the earth for 180 million years. That's what they tell us. So why did they become extinct, but not the crocodiles, and not the flowering plants, and not the frogs, and not the moths, which are much more delicate creatures? They survived the supposed meteor impact, but the dinosaurs were wiped out. I think it wiped out the wrong things. And my own favorite evolutionary theory is this one, that tobacco evolved, they all died of lung cancer. So what can we say in summary before I let you guys ask me a few questions is that dinosaurs tell us about God's creativity as we find in Genesis 1, but also about the fall that we find in Genesis 3. And of course, that's as a result of man's sin, there was judgment, and a huge judgment was the flood because man was so wicked, but God flooded the whole world to start over again with Noah. But God tells us about the providence, because God gave us an ark. God gave Noah an ark, so anyone who went on the ark could be saved from this judgment of the flood. There's also a judgment that we all are under because of our sin, but God has provided us with a way out. Our own ark, if you like, Jesus Christ, our Lord and Savior, is the only way to escape our just punishment for our sin, is through Jesus Christ. And the Bible even compares the ark to Jesus. The ark saved them from physical judgment. Jesus saved us from the second death. So let's now give you another thing. What I really recommend before you look at some of the books is the best witnessing tool we have is our Creation magazine. So you guys are ready for the Creation magazine? No, I'll tell you when, but I just want to make sure you're okay. This is the best thing you can have, I think, is our Creation magazine subscription, because it comes to the whole family. It keeps on equipping the whole year round, so it's really good for the whole family. And it is one of the best witnessing tools we have for for teaching your family about why creation matters. And this is what you do. You fill in your name and your address, because we post this to you. But if you put your email on, we actually have a free email subscription along with that, which you can send to other people around the world. We'll give you the code, and you can give it to up to 5 different people around the world if you do that. So that's one of the things you can do. And when you do that, you get 5 different devices, and you'll get your first issue today, which is nice. You can start reading right away. But now please don't go away with the subscription. When you fill out the form, please take it with you and then pass the clipboard on to the next one. You want to go pass around? Thanks, Malachi. Go ahead and pass. Thanks. Thanks for your patience. So you fill this out, name, address, email address, and then pass to the next person in line. But don't go away. Give it to Dawn and David, who are generously helping me at the book table today. And when you pay for 1 year, as I say, your first issue today, but if you pay for 2 years, it's even better because you get a free book along with it. You get a discount it's a bulk discount for paying for 2 years anyway, but you get this free book as well. So it's a real Jewish bargain if you get this a 2-year subscription. And you also get stuff every month. So every month you'll get some nice newsletter. People have been really interested in our newsletters recently. One of the latest is I wrote an article about the art for our latest newsletter. I'm writing one about the pitch on the art for one of the coming newsletters. So a few different things you can get when you subscribe, not just the magazine, but all these newsletters too. Now here's one of the articles we have. It's a classic article, How Do Dating Methods Work? And this is not about how boys meet girls. It's about how old things are. And we also have things like these twin girls, giving an idea about how different races could have come from Adam and Eve. And there's also lots of dinosaur articles in the magazine as well. But there's also some kids pages too. If you've got a family with your kids or grandkids, they might like to have the kids page. Like this is a series a while back on astronomy, and this is a series I'm doing on the flood. I've got one more to write. As for kids, you might like this Creation Astronomy for Kids. There's a new book we have, and this new dinosaur pack we have for kids with books of different ages. You've got books for the older kids and the younger kids, plus some dinosaur flashcards and things. It's a really nice pack for the kids there, and it's heavily discounted. This is a general kids pack and a family pack here. So we try and make it as easy as possible to bulk buy and save a lot that way. And also these will make good Christmas and birthday presents too. For more advanced stuff on dinosaurs, you might like this Titans book. This is for high schools and the adult book on dinosaurs. And we have a curriculum as well, which could be interesting for a lot of people, 11 and up. People have been asking us for that. And my latest book is called By Design, about the amazing wonders of God's creation, from the wonders, the microscopic wonders in each of our cells, the robotic systems in our cell, plus the gigantic wonders as well. So a few different things in the book table there. And we have this Genesis Academy, which is the video version, teaching video version of the Genesis account, 12 different 35-minute videos, great for a homeschool or a church study group. You can go through over 12 weeks, and there's a free study that goes with it. Now, I do have some time for questions if you want to. Don't know how late you're allowed to stay, but I don't mind asking, open up for a few questions if you'd like to. The only rule I have is that what you say must end in a question mark, okay? Go ahead.
Did the atmosphere change affect the heart rates and anything like that with the dinosaurs?
I don't believe there was an atmosphere change, to be honest. I don't think there's good enough evidence to accept there was an atmosphere change before and after the flood. That's some of the older creationists of about 30 plus years ago thought that. I think the evidence is equivocal. It's not clear one way or the other that there was an atmosphere change. I think they could have coped. I think it's just a matter of what they did to cope. Like we know giraffes can cope with this pressure change, and I think there's reason to believe that dinosaurs could have done the same, just like there's reason to believe that pterosaur could have flown in today's atmospheric pressure. I don't think there's any conclusive evidence that the atmosphere has changed. Okay?
Can you explain adapting if evolution is not real? Because evolution is basically adapting just over millions and millions of years.
Well, I would dispute that because adaptation is part of the biblical creation model as well. See, creation is before Darwin understood natural selection and adaptation. So if it's part of the creation model, it can't be used as evidence against the creation model because it's part of the creation model as well. The creation model is not fixity of species. We believe a species, and God designed species to change, which means there's adaptation. Even before the fall, there was adaptation. So adaptation is there. God programmed us, all creatures, with a huge amount of genetic variation, which means they had the ability to adapt to a whole lot of different conditions. Now, my first book, Refuting Evolution, which is designed for the high school, the second chapter is all about variation, natural selection, and the created kind. It talks about adaptation and how that occurs in the biblical time, it's a biblical framework. It does not prove evolution. For instance, in fact, I'll talk about that tomorrow at church. In the church, so I'll talk about natural selection tomorrow. If you don't mind waiting till tomorrow's service, I'll talk about what happens, for instance, when dogs adapt to the cold. What is actually going on genetically, and how it does not help evolution. In fact, it does the opposite because natural selection is a culling force, not a creative force. Natural selection works by taking out the unfit. It doesn't create the fit, it removes that which is not fit. And so that's how that works. That's how adaptation works, often by removing what is not suited to that condition. But see, God programmed the created kinds with lots of different genes that they could actually adapt to different things. You have some which can adapt to the cold, some which can adapt to the hot. So, and with the fish, some can adapt to the salty water, some to the fresh water. Again, without evolution happening, there's no turning of one kind into another. It's all within the kind. And the examples they give you, you see, that's why I think evolution is so deceptive, is that they will try to prove evolution with examples of adaptation or examples of natural selection, which have been part of creation models since before Darwin's time. So they can't be used as proof of one over the other. It's what you might call the fallacy of overlapping predictive realms. Something which is a part of both models can't be used to discriminate between one over the other. You have to have something which one model says yes, other says no, not one that both models say yes to. I'll talk about that more tomorrow, okay?
So you mentioned that insects may not have been on the ark.
Correct.
Where did they come from?
Well, insects they survived the flood, but probably because the flood would tear up huge amounts of vegetation. Even small floods today, they will tear up masses of plant matter and form natural rafts. And even today, animals, much bigger animals, have actually hopped from one island to another on these natural rafts. So it happens even today. Natural rafts can hold animals. I'd say when you have a giant flood, you're going to have these humongous natural rafts, and for a whole year, because they could hold the small things like insects. They couldn't hold the big things for a whole year, but they could hold the small things. So insects survived off the ark on these natural rafts that the flood would have produced. Another idea is pumice or driftwood, but I think natural rafting is the best place to find the insects and the arachnids and those sort of things. That's where they've been, off the ark on these giant rafts. Yes, sir?
If insects weren't on the ark, what about spiders? Because spiders are not insects.
You are correct that spiders not. That's why I distinguish insects and arachnids. But I think arachnids are the same thing. They would have been on these rafts as well. Yes, it is. Yeah, a spider definitely not an insect. So they only have 2 body parts instead of 3, and they have 8 legs instead of 6, right? And they have book lungs and various things like that. Yeah, I don't really like arachnids too much, but I have to admit. But we need a few because, thanks to spiders, the insects in your house are not going to be as bad as they could be. So they do good for us. Not in Australia. Australia, they have very nasty spiders called funnel webs, which can bite through your fingernail. That's how bad they are. But go ahead. Yes, ma'am.
Yes, if you use the word Pangea to indicate the separation of the continent from one big mass into multiple masses, would you say that most of that was occurring during and shortly after the flood?
Yes, I do.
Okay.
In fact, Creation Answers book, chapter 11, is all about continental drift, and we think the Bible teaches one landmass before the flood because it says the waters were gathered together into one place and the dry land appeared. That seems to be one main pre-flood landmass, and I think what happened for the flood was actually to break up this landmass. And the theory behind that is called catastrophic plate tectonics. We have now slow and gradual plate tectonics, but it would have been much faster in the past, and it wouldn't have happened long ago, because what happens, you have one plate going underneath another called subduction, and when you measure the temperature down here, it's still quite cool. You see, millions of years, it should have warmed up to the surrounding material, but it's thousands of degrees cooler. It means it hasn't been there long enough. So it means it went down there a few thousand years ago, not a few million years ago, because that's why it's still able to be so cool, you see. So I think that this seems to support the idea of a very rapid process that happened a few thousand years ago. And it would have broken up that single one continent that existed before the flood, yes. Yes, sir.
Can you talk about fossil fuels? People say there's a limited amount of fossil fuels, and it relates to this idea that the dinosaurs and all the plant matter all died during this catastrophic event. Do you think fossil fuels are a limited resource, or did God put it there?
Believe it or not, my commentary is the only one that talks about fossil fuels as well, you know. Yeah, it's unusual to have a Genesis commentary talking about fossil fuels. The idea is that plants are sort of solar energy concentrators. See, we could not be photosynthetic, you see, because we need leaves, a huge volume of leaves, because we need so much energy. So we eat the plants that have already concentrated the energy. So I think plants are basically God's self-reproducing, solar-powered food factories. And the flood enabled further concentration of plant matter into fossil fuels. And fossil fuels have been a blessing to us. We had the Industrial Revolution because of fossil fuels. It's enabled us to have cheap energy, which has been a lifesaver. So climate deaths were far worse hundreds of years ago than they are now, because we have the energy to cope with changing climates, which we didn't have even 100 years ago. See, in Europe, more people die of cold than they die of the heat, because of the expensive fuel in places like Germany, who cripple their fossil fuel industry. And now the people can't afford to heat their houses, and they die in winter because it's too cold. I think it's a very inhuman thing, but unfortunately, the greenies, at least the fanatical environmentalists, don't believe what God said, that God gave man dominion over creation, which means men are more important than other things. They think they think humans are a pollution on the planet, so they're quite happy for millions of people to die of the cold, or malaria, or things like that, which is really bad. But I think fossil fuels have been good for us, and if you want to avoid fossil fuels, build nuclear plants. But they don't want to do that because they're afraid of nuclear, even though the worst nuclear accident was Chernobyl. 56 people died. Twice that many died building the Hoover Dam. So perspective. We live in a fallen world. We can't have perfect solutions. We only have trade-offs between various levels of goodness and badness. And it's up to us to try to be wise and choose the best trade-off we can, given what we have available. And I think the best trade-off is to have fossil fuel generation for cheap energy and coping with the climate change with these cheap energy, rather than having people die because they can't afford to heat their houses. Yes, sir?
If dinosaurs were on the ark, then they grew. You
Correct.
said that humans hunted them, and that's how those dinosaurs went extinct. But how did we hunt them? Because dinosaurs are so strong.
Okay, well, think about whales. We hunted whales, you might remember. Have you ever read Moby Dick, for instance? The first great American novel, probably. Humans almost hunted whales to extinction with handheld harpoons and wooden sailing ships. But whales are bigger than dinosaurs. They have bigger brains and more intelligence than dinosaurs, and they also have the home turf advantage of being in the ocean, and yet humans almost wiped out the whale populations. So if we could wipe out the whale population, we could wipe out the dinosaurs too, because we have, on the land, we're on our own, the same turf, and we have the ability to use weaponry and fire and traps and poison. Those are some ways that humans could have outwitted the dinosaurs. I'm not saying one human goes up and hunts a dinosaur by himself, but teamwork, or build a trap for them to fall in, a poison dart. There are things you could do. If you could do it to the whales, you could do it to the dinosaurs. That's the thing. I mean, we know it's been done to the whales. Unfortunately, I'm very sorry. I like whales. It's a shame that whales are endangered. They shouldn't have been. We don't need to hunt whales, but unfortunately humans hunted them, and I wish they hadn't. But since it had been done, it means it could have been done to dinosaurs. Yes, ma'am.
So you said that many of the dinosaurs died kind of instantly, but the flood took 40 days and 40 nights, and I feel like that would really be a lot more gradual. So, for instance, those two dinosaurs that are fighting, how did they die so suddenly? Because for one, drowning takes a while, and two, and you can't die that quickly from a little bit of rainwater. Like, how long must have they been fighting to die from
I think
drowning?
they weren't just drowned there, they were probably buried there. See, not just in water, but those dinosaurs were buried by a whole hunk of a huge amount of sediment, which means that the weight of the sediment would stop them moving and also suffocate them really quickly. So they'd be deprived of oxygen pretty quickly. So they wouldn't be underwater. I think they would be under huge amounts of sediment, mud and water, not just the water. It's a sediment that buried them and then stopped the salamanders getting to them. So it wasn't just the being in water for that time. But you'd be surprised how quickly drowning works. I think people don't seem to realize how dangerous drowning is because people don't know what drowning really looks like. There's some helpful videos around about how to recognize someone who really is drowning and doesn't look like what you think a drowning person looks like. It's much quicker than you might think it is. I don't wish it on anyone, of course. But yeah, it would have been quite quick for those things being buried under a whole lot of stuff. I think, but a mudslide on a huge scale, though. So I think mudslides would be a very real thing. And also the flood. See, the 40 days and 40 nights describe the rainfall, but the flood lasted a whole year. Because remember, there's also the fountains of the great deep bursting forth. But the 40 days and 40 nights of rain was all, but the flood lasted a whole year. It was a whole year before they could get off the ark again. Because it talks about the flood prevailing for 150 days. So the flood kept on growing for another 150 days, for about 150 days total. So it's half a year the flood is still growing because the stuff is coming from below as well as the rainfall. So very long. And when you think of, even a small flood, 6 inches of running water can knock down a strong man. And about 2 feet of running water can overturn an SUV. That's how powerful running water is. When you think of, that's just a small flood. When you think of running water of a global flood, that is going to be incredibly destructive. I think people don't realize how destructive floods are. Even a moderately deep flood has the energy of a tornado when it comes to the ability to knock things over. Reinforced concrete and steel can be knocked over by floods. That's how powerful they can be. Now you think of a flood on a global scale, nothing is going to stand up to that.
How could such huge dinosaurs, in the ark, how do they, stay, in there, and not be cramped? Do they just, lay down and get some beauty sleep?
Well, as I said, I think they weren't huge when they went on the ark. I think they were juveniles, young ones, before they had their growth spurt. You know what I mean? When it comes to humans, all parents know about teenage growth spurts, right? Well, dinosaurs went through something like that. So I think they went on board the ark before their growth spurts. They weren't that big. I don't think they would have been full-size Brachiosaurus or T-Rex and all. I think they would have been much smaller creatures. Maybe even the biggest dinosaur might have been only 1 ton when he was on board the ark. So they weren't big when they went on the ark. They grew big after they got off the ark, okay? Okay, gentleman there.
I'm curious if you have any thoughts about whether COVID was largely I won't say made, but engineered.
I don't think so. That's a bit of a controversial topic, but I want to not talk about it too much. But I think COVID was natural. I think I don't believe it was man-made. Okay, so it's my own opinion. You don't have to believe me if you don't want to. In my opinion, it was actually a natural, because it seemed to happen before with other things. I mean, the flu virus seems to be a natural avian virus. Ebola seems to come from bats. There are quite a few things that seem to be, it's called a zoonotic transfer when it goes from an animal to a human. That's why they're dangerous. Because God created viruses and bacteria to be good for us. After the fall, some became bad for us, and when it comes to virus, one reason they could become bad for us is they hopped from one thing where it's supposed to be to another where it's not supposed to be. Like a harmless and possibly beneficial bird virus becomes a dangerous virus like influenza. Okay, so I think it's what happened with COVID as well. I think a natural thing, but I think there's some quite bad things happened. It shouldn't have got out of the whole world. It should have been locked down as soon as it was noted. But unfortunately, communist China threw whistleblowers in jail for warning about how dangerous this thing was, so it got out to the whole world. And then they changed their tune a bit. But I mean, at first they were pretending it didn't transmit by human to human contact, which we know it does, unfortunately. It's a horrible thing to happen. I managed to escape it, thank goodness. But people I know died from the thing, which is terrible, really. But I mean, even now, you know, your body has more bacterial cells than human cells, mostly in your large intestine, and you need those bacteria. Okay, but you've got about 10 times more viruses inside you. And those viruses and bacteria keep each other in line, keep each other from getting out of control. So I wrote it, if you look at it on the website, I wrote an article called The Microbiome and Virome. It talks about all the good bacteria and viruses you all have inside you, which you need to be healthy. Just as a lesson that God created these things to be good, but since the fall had become bad. Some of them have become bad. Most are still good today. I'll get to you first, this gentleman here, then I'll get to you. Okay, the last question, okay?
So we have DNA. Why don't we insert the DNA into eggs?
You're talking about cloning?
What do you mean? Can you clarify?
You mean cloning?
Yeah, like unstinking. Because if we have DNA, you could insert the DNA into the egg. Wouldn't that clone?
You've actually watched a lot of Jurassic World movies, have you? Okay. Doesn't matter if you have. I mean, I've watched them all as well for research purposes only. Okay. The problem is that we have dinosaur DNA which should not be there. It shouldn't be even if it was frozen and a tenth of the supposed age, it should have been disintegrated by now. Even frozen it shouldn't have lasted as long as it does. And dinosaurs lived in the tropics where it should break down in a few thousand years. What we see in the dinosaur DNA is about what you expect if dinosaurs died out 4,500 years ago. It's about the right amount, but it's very fragmented. So you couldn't use that DNA to clone a dinosaur because it's broken into millions of pieces. We don't know which order they go back together. It's like a jigsaw puzzle, but we haven't got the actual cover of a jigsaw to know how to put it back together again. And also we haven't got a dinosaur egg to put it in either. That's a problem too. You're right, it needs an egg. Not just the DNA, it needs the egg to put it in, but we haven't got a dinosaur egg, so I'm afraid we're out of luck for cloning a dinosaur. Okay, you briefly, then the gentleman over there. You first, go here, young man. I think Noah fed the animals because he had centralized equipment, very low-tech equipment. You wouldn't need very high-tech, but what you have is a central cylinder with water and a central cylinder with grain or dried meats, for instance, dried meat, and you have a trough. So you have one central feeding station and you let the stuff into the trough. So it wouldn't be having to feed every animal by hand because you have these automatic things, which are not very high-tech, which people have known about for thousands of years. People have known how to take care of animals for thousands of years with these low-tech devices like these central filling stations and troughs. So it could have been done. But gentleman over there, and then maybe last question, okay? But thank you, though.
So mine is towards the catastrophic tectonic type stuff, which I ascribe to. To the young lady's point over there, just a quick refresher. When Hurricane Helene hit us back in 24, it was only 3 days of rain, about 21 inches, and it resulted in massive catastrophic mudslides, deaths, and destruction, which they're still recovering from today. So 40 days would be pretty rough. But are you going to be touching on some of that? Because I know some people would argue, like, oh, so the flood went to Mount St. Helens, and my argument has always been Mount St. Helens didn't exist, and there's seashells up there.
Well, correct. You know that there's actually marine limestone on the top of Mount Everest. And bottom-dwelling fossils are on top of Mount Everest, which shows it was underwater once. But you are quite right. These mountains came after the flood. As a result of these really fast movements, would have pushed and buckled and pushed the mountains up, like the mountain range of the Himalayas. They did not exist before the flood. So the idea of how did the water cover Mount Everest, what Everest didn't exist to cover at the time. All these mountains that we talk about came after the flood. And we see the evidence, and not only because of the marine limestone on the top, but also the very sharp bends in the rock layers. Well, how do you bend a rock? Tell me how to bend a rock. What happens when you try and bend a rock? It breaks. So the only way you're going to get these sharp bends is if the rock is not hard yet. So the rock's laid down by water, it's still soft, and it's pushed up and bent like this, and then it hardens after it's been bent. Which means all the rock was all these massive layers of rock were still soft when they were pushed together and bent. They didn't have a chance to harden, otherwise you would see the breakages when you try and bend it. But thanks, I guess it's a good time to stop before it just gets too late. But thanks for all your good questions. I like questions that even challenge me a bit, so I'm happy to get that. So tomorrow at
10:30.
10:30. Okay, I'll be here tomorrow at 10:30. So tomorrow is more about why does Genesis matter. I'll talk a bit more about the flood tomorrow morning. Also, I'm going to talk about design and natural selection tomorrow morning because people obviously need that's what people need to know. But there's amazing design and living things I want to talk about as well. But the main thing is how does Genesis relate to who Jesus is and to the gospel even? So it's not a side issue. That's what I'll be talking about tomorrow in the church service. So thank you very much for your attention, and thank you, Pastor, for your hospitality.
Thank you so much. Hey, and don't forget that 10:30 tomorrow and 4 o'clock as well. I know that many of you have local churches that you go and you worship at. We're thankful for that. Make sure that you invite some friends. Make sure that you're back at 4 o'clock I think that one is 6 days, really. And so it's going to be a great time. So I hope that it would be a great encouragement to you. I want to read to you just this passage real quick as Dr. Sarfati was sharing. Psalm 19, verses 1 through 4. It says, "The heavens declare the glory of God, and the sky above proclaims his handiwork. Day to day pours out speech, and night to night reveals knowledge. There is no speech, nor are there words whose voice is not heard. Their voice goes out through all the earth, and their words to the end of the world." All creation declares the glory of God. Amen? Go in peace. Thank you.
Thank you. Oh, thank you. Yeah, please, that'd be great. Thank you.